What happens when a man tries to erase his past? Alexander Stanton, a titan of industry, thought he had it all, a new younger woman on his arm and a pristine reputation. At the year's most exclusive high society gala, he planned to debut his new life. But he made one critical mistake. He forgot who he married. He forgot the woman he shattered was forged in fire. In a world of glittering chandeliers and whispered secrets, a queen is about to reclaim her throne, and the scandal that follows will bring an empire to its knees. You will not believe what happens next. The silence in Irene Russo's sprawling Soho loft was a living thing. It had been her constant companion for the 14 months since the divorce was finalized. It was a different kind of silence than the one she'd known in the 15-room Park Avenue penthouse she'd shared with Alexander Stanton. That silence had been heavy, suffocating, thick with unspoken accusations and the weight of a future that would never be. This silence was her own. It was the quiet of creation, of healing, of a life being painstakingly rebuilt from the ashes. Irene traced the rim of her teacup, her gaze fixed on the invitation propped against a stack of art history books. The paper was thick, cream-colored, the calligraphy a work of art in itself. The Board of Trustees for the Atherton Museum of Modern Art requests the pleasure of your company at the annual Legacy Gala. Her first instinct was to burn it. The Legacy Gala was the crown jewel of New York's social calendar, a place she and Alex had once ruled as the city's golden couple. He, the charismatic heir to the Stanton and Finch investment empire. She, the elegant Italian-born art historian, who gave his raw ambition a touch of class. They were a brand, and then the brand had been liquidated. A memory sharp and unwelcome pierced the quiet. They were in a fertility clinic, the air sterile and cold. Alex hadn't looked at her. He just stared at the polished floor, his jaw tight. The doctors have been clear, Irene, he'd said, his voice devoid of warmth. It's you. My family needs an heir. The Stanton name needs to continue. We can't continue like this. It wasn't a discussion, it was a verdict. He had pronounced her barren defective. The love she thought they had, the partnership she'd cherished, evaporated under the harsh fluorescent lights of that clinic. He called her cold, career-obsessed, and worst of all, empty. He had used her inability to conceive a child as the justification for his affair, painting himself as the victim of a loveless, fruitless marriage. The affair had a name, Chloe Summers, a 24-year-old model with wide, innocent eyes, and presumably a fully functional reproductive system. The divorce was a quiet, brutal affair. Alex's lawyers were sharks. They protected his assets, his reputation, his narrative. Irene, broken and bewildered, had taken a settlement and retreated from the world they had once dominated. She had disappeared just as he intended. But in that self-imposed exile, something had shifted. The grief at first, a tsunami, had receded, leaving behind a hard, unshakable foundation of anger. Not a fiery, reckless anger, but a cold, clear, focused rage. He had called her empty. She would show him what she could create. She poured her settlement, her soul, and every waking hour into the one thing that had always been hers, her passion for art. She leased the Soho loft, transforming the ground floor into a boutique art gallery, Galleria Russo. She had a preternatural eye for undiscovered talent, for pieces that spoke of struggle, resilience, and defiant beauty. In just a year, she had become the most talked about new gallerist in the city. She didn't need the Stanton name. The Russo name, her father's name, was proving to be more than enough. Her phone buzzed. It was her assistant and friend, Maya. Please tell me you're going. I'm looking at the invitation right now. Irene said, her voice betraying none of her turmoil. It feels like walking back into the lion's den. Exactly. Maya's voice was electric. But this time, you're the lion. Izzy, listen to me. Alexander Stanton doesn't own the Atherton. You are a patron of the arts. You just curated the critically acclaimed Echoes of Silence exhibit. You have more right to be there than half the trust fund babies who'll be sipping champagne. This isn't about him. This is about you. It's about the gallery. It's a business decision. Maya was right. Hiding was what he wanted. Hiding was admitting defeat. Attending the gala wasn't about confronting Alex. It was about cementing her own place in a world that had tried to discard her. It was about showing them all that she was not a tragic ex-wife. She was a force in her own right. Okay, Irene said, a slow smile spreading across her face. I'll go. Yes. Now the important part. What are you going to wear? Irene laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. I have an idea. Something he'll hate. Her mind went to a designer she'd recently begun collecting, a reclusive genius named Antoine Dubois, who crafted gowns that were less clothes and more architectural statements. She had acquired one of his pieces at auction months ago, a dress that was waiting for the perfect moment. It was not a dress for a wallflower. It was a declaration of war stitched in silk and audacity. For the next week, Irene prepared for battle. She confirmed her attendance, making a significant donation to the museum's acquisition fund in the name of Galleria Rosso. The act ensured her name would be listed prominently in the program, separate from any lingering association with the Stantons. She worked with a stylist, not to change her look, but to amplify it. The brief was simple, regal, unforgettable, untouchable. On the evening of the gala, the city hummed with anticipation. Limousines lined Fifth Avenue, depositing the city's elite onto the red carpet that snaked up the grand steps of the Atherton. Inside Irene's loft was an oasis of calm focus. Her hair was swept up in an intricate chignon, revealing the graceful line of her neck. Her makeup was dramatic, but elegant, a smoky eye and a bold, blood-red lip. And then there was the dress. It was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light. It was sculpted to her form, with a daringly low-cut back and an architectural, asymmetrical neckline that swept over one shoulder like a wave cresting in a storm. It was severe yet sensual, a study in contrasts. It was the color of a twilight sky, just before the stars appear full of power and promise. She accessorized not with the demure pearls Alex had always preferred, but with a single stunning piece, a diamond and sapphire necklace from Bulgari's heritage collection, a piece she had bought for herself with the first major profits from her gallery. It was called the Star of Resilience. As she looked at her reflection, she didn't see the broken woman from the clinic. She saw Irene Russo, founder, curator, survivor. Maya, she said into her phone, her voice steady. Send the car. It's time to go to the ball. She was no longer Cinderella. Tonight, she was the goddamn queen. The air outside the Atherton Museum was a symphony of controlled chaos. The pop, pop, pop of camera flashes. The polite roar of the crowd held back by velvet ropes. The deferential greetings of valets. It was a world Alexander Stanton navigated with the ease of a man born to it. He stepped out of his black Bentley, a picture of tailored perfection in a Tom Ford tuxedo. He turned and offered his hand to his companion. Chloe Summers emerged like a champagne bubble. She was dazzling in a frothy, pale pink Marchesa gown, her blonde hair styled in soft waves. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, gifts from Alex. She was beautiful, vibrant, and looked at him with an adoration that was as much a part of his ensemble as his platinum cufflinks. She was the perfect accessory, a living testament to his virility and power. He squeezed her hand. Ready, my love. It's a little overwhelming, she whispered, her eyes wide. Just stay close to me. You're with me now. This is your world too, he said, his voice a smooth balm of reassurance. He loved this part, the benevolent protector, the powerful man introducing his ingenue to society. It was a role he played to perfection. They posed on the red carpet, Alex's arm possessively around Chloe's waist. The photographers yelled his name. He was back and he had upgraded. The narrative was clear for anyone watching. The stuffy, barren wife was gone, replaced by this vision of youthful fertility. He felt a surge of triumph. Irene was a ghost, a memory he had successfully exorcised. Inside the great hall was breathtaking. Soaring ceilings, colossal floral arrangements, and the gentle hum of the city's 1%. Alex moved through the room with purpose, Chloe trailing in his wake. He greeted a banking rival, shared a clipped masculine laugh with a senator, and introduced Chloe to Eleanor Vance, the formidable, silver-haired matriarch of the Vance real estate dynasty. Eleanor Vance, a woman whose opinion could make or break fortunes, looked Chloe up and down with an imperceptible arch of her eyebrow. Charming, she said, her tone as dry as the vintage champagne in her glass, before turning her attention away without another word. Alex felt a prickle of irritation. Eleanor had always had a soft spot for Irene, admiring her intellect and sharp wit. A small, insignificant detail. He was holding court near the main staircase when the atmosphere in the hall shifted. It wasn't a loud change, but a subtle one. A hush began at the entrance and rippled through the crowd like a wave. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. A cluster of photographers, who had been packing up their gear, suddenly scrambled back into position, their flashes faint with renewed urgency. Alex followed the collective gaze, a smug smile on his face, assuming some major celebrity had arrived. The smile froze, then melted away, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Descending the grand marble staircase was Irene. It wasn't the Irene he remembered, the quiet, accommodating woman who dressed in elegant but safe beiges and creams. This was a different creature entirely. The midnight blue gown clung to her like a second skin, a slash of defiant color in a sea of pastels and blacks. The Bulgari necklace at her throat caught the light of the chandeliers, scattering shards of icy fire across her skin. Her chin was high, her gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd with a cool, appraising confidence that bordered on disdain. She wasn't walking, she was making a procession. She moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a panther who knows she is the most dangerous animal in the jungle. Every eye was on her. Whispers erupted throughout the hall. "Is that Irene? My God, I didn't even recognize her. She looks incredible. Stanton is going to have a stroke." Chloe felt the shift instantly. The arm around her waist, which had been a symbol of possession, now felt like an anchor. "Alex, who is that?" she asked, her voice small. Alex couldn't answer. His throat was tight. He felt a hot, prickling sensation crawl up his neck. This wasn't possible. She was supposed to be gone. She was supposed to be irrelevant, a footnote in his grand life story. But the woman on the staircase was no footnote. She was the headline. Irene paused on the landing, allowing the full effect of her arrival to sink in. She didn't look for him. She didn't need to. She knew he was watching. She gave a small regal nod to someone in the crowd, a museum curator she admired, and then continued her descent. People unconsciously parted to let her pass the way one makes way for royalty. She wasn't just beautiful. He had always known she was beautiful. This was something else. This was power. It radiated from her. The woman he had called empty was now the fullest, most commanding presence in the entire room. He had spent a year carefully constructing a narrative of his new life, and in the space of 30 seconds, she had single-handedly demolished it. "Alex," Chloe repeated, tugging his sleeve. The adoration in her eyes had been replaced by a flicker of confusion and insecurity. "Who is she?" Finally finding his voice, Alex gritted his teeth. That he said, his voice a low, venomous rasp, "is my ex-wife." He watched as Mr. Davies, the director of the museum, rushed to greet Irene, kissing her on both cheeks with genuine warmth. He saw Eleanor Vance's severe face break into a rare, authentic smile as she beckoned Irene over. He saw half a dozen of the city's most influential power brokers turning their backs on him to watch her. In that moment, standing beside his beautiful young mistress, Alexander Stanton, had never felt so utterly and completely upstaged. The Queen had returned to the board, and he was suddenly terrifyingly in check. The first rule of high society warfare is that it is never fought with raised voices. It is a game of strategic alliances, of subtle sleights of conversations that end abruptly when an enemy approaches. And Irene, it turned out, was a master strategist. She did not glance in Alex's direction. Her calculated indifference was a more profound insult than any public screaming match could ever be. He was to her irrelevant. She moved through the Great Hall with the purpose Maya had advised. This was business. She engaged with the director, Mr. Davies, discussing the nuances of a new acquisition. She spoke with a prominent art critic from the New York Times, her insights sharp and articulate. She was not just attending, she was participating, contributing, belonging. Eleanor Vance greeted her with a dry martini and an even drier wit. Irene, my dear, I see you've decided to stop hiding your light under a bushel, or in your case, under a Stanton. Irene smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. Eleanor, I simply realized I prefer the lighting in my own gallery. Eleanor let out a short bark-like laugh, her eyes twinkling as she glanced over Irene's shoulder toward Alex, who was standing stiffly, with Chloe looking like a man who had just swallowed a wasp. His new companion, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with disdain, looks like she was gift-wrapped by a teenager. You, on the other hand, look like you own the building. A marked improvement. The validation was like a sip of cool water. Eleanor Vance's approval was a currency more valuable than gold in this room. Their conversation created a small, powerful nexus drawing others. In a senator's wife, a tech billionaire, a federal judge. Irene was at the center of a new constellation, and its gravity was pulling attention away from Alex's fading star. Across the room, Alex was seething. He could feel the whispers, see the sideways glances. Chloe's earlier effervescence had fizzled out, replaced by a sullen pout. Why is everyone talking to her? She asked, her voice petulant. You said nobody cared about her anymore. They don't, Alex snapped, then softened his tone when he saw the hurt in her eyes. It's just novelty, darling. They're vultures drawn to drama. Ignore it. Let's get a drink. He tried to reclaim control, to steer the narrative back to him. He led Chloe toward the bar, deliberately plotting a course that would force an encounter with Irene. He needed to reassert his dominance to show everyone that he was unbothered, that he was the one who had moved on. As they approached Irene's circle, politely parted. She turned, her expression one of mild, polite curiosity, as if noticing a junior staffer from her husband's firm. Alexander, she said, her voice smooth and cool. The formal use of his full name was a subtle, sharp jab. No one had called him Alexander since his father died. I didn't realize you were here. It was a blatant, beautiful lie. His plan to be cool and dismissive evaporated. He was a moth drawn to her icy flame. Irene, you're looking, well. I am, she replied, her gaze flicking for a brief, dismissive moment to Chloe. And you must be Chloe. That's a brave choice of color. It was a masterclass in condescension, a compliment that was so clearly an insult. The pale pink gown that had seemed so lovely on the red carpet now looked juvenile and unsophisticated next to Irene's powerful midnight blue. Chloe flushed, stammering a thank you. She felt like a child at the adults' table. Alex clenched his jaw. We're very happy, he said, putting a possessive arm around Chloe's waist again. The gesture was meant to be a display of ownership, but it looked defensive, desperate. Irene's smile didn't waver. I'm so glad to hear that. Happiness is so important. She then turned her back on them completely and utterly and resumed her conversation with the judge. The dismissal was absolute. She had acknowledged him, neutralized him, and erased him all within 60 seconds. Defeated, Alex retreated to the terrace, pulling Chloe with him. The cool night air did nothing to quell the fire in his gut. This was a disaster. He had brought Chloe here to launch her into society, to cement their status as the new power couple. Instead, he had made her look like a consolation prize and himself like a fool. Irene, meanwhile, continued her calculated procession. She knew this world was built on perception, and tonight she was crafting a masterpiece of it. Her final destination was a quiet conversation with a man standing near a Rodin sculpture, observing the crowd. Dr. Marcus Thorne. He had been the Stanton family doctor for 30 years, a gentle, kind man who had treated Irene for everything from the flu to a sprained ankle. He had also been the one to refer her and Alex to the fertility specialist. Dr. Thorne, she said softly. He turned his kind eyes crinkling in a sad smile. Irene, my dear girl, it is wonderful to see you looking so radiant. It's been a long time, she said. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the glittering spectacle. I was so sorry to hear about everything he said, his voice low and full of genuine regret. I never liked how it was handled, how he handled it. He had his reasons, Irene replied, her voice neutral. Dr. Thorne sighed, swirling the brandy in his snifter. He looked at her, his expression conflicted, as if wrestling with a professional confidence. People create narratives to protect themselves, Irene, especially men with fragile egos. He paused, then seemed to make a decision. I always felt there was more to that story. The specialists, he insisted, you see, they were top of their field, of course, but Alex was very specific about which ones, the ones known for their discretion. Irene felt a sudden chill despite the warmth of the room. What are you saying, Marcus? He looked around to ensure they weren't being overheard. Just that, in medicine, we often find that the person shouting the loudest about a problem is the one trying to distract from the real source. He met her eyes, and in his gaze, she saw a universe of unspoken meaning. He was always so obsessed with the Stanton legacy, with his father's expectations. A man like that. Sometimes a lie is easier to live with than a truth he can't accept. He didn't need to say more. The seed was planted. A horrifying, electrifying possibility began to bloom in her mind. What if the narrative Alex had built, his entire divorce, on her failure? Her emptiness was a complete and utter fabrication. What if the problem had never been her at all? The thought was so staggering, so audacious, that she had to grip the marble balustrade for support. This changed everything. Her quest for independence had just become a quest for justice. The Cold War was about to heat up. From Alexander Stanton's vantage point, the grand ballroom of the Atherton had transformed from a theatre of his triumph into a hostile territory. Every corner he turned, he felt Irene's presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. It wasn't just that she was there, it was the way she occupied the space. He watched his jaw tightening as she moved from one influential circle to another, not as a guest, but as a peer. He saw the genuine warmth in the smile of a Guggenheim curator as he listened to her. He saw the rapt attention of Marcella Leone, the notoriously ruthless editor of Vogue, a woman who barely gave Alex himself the time of day. His mind scrambled to reframe what he was seeing to fit it into a narrative he could control. It's a novelty, he told himself, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. She's the tragic ex-wife making her brave return. They're talking to her out of pity. But even as he formed the thought, he knew it was a lie. There was no pity in the eyes of the people surrounding her. There was respect. There was intrigue. There was a magnetism he hadn't seen in her since the first year of their marriage, and even then it had been a quieter force, one he had prided himself on discovering and nurturing. Now it was a blazing sun, and he was being cast into its shadow. His arm was draped around Chloe, but the gesture, once a proud display of possession, now felt like a desperate anchor in a surging tide. Chloe, for her part, was beginning to wilt. The initial thrill of the glittering gowns and endless champagne had worn off, replaced by the distinct, uncomfortable feeling of being an outsider. "I'm bored, Alex," she murmured, nudging his arm. "Can we go dance or talk to someone fun?" Her gaze drifted across the room to where Irene was now sharing a laugh with a famous film director. Why is everyone still talking to her? She asked the question, laced with a petulant whine. he was starting to find grating. You told me she was nobody without you. She looks like she's holding court. She's not. Alex snapped, his voice sharper than intended. He saw the flicker of hurt in Chloe's wide eyes and immediately softened his tone, reverting to his role as the benevolent protector. Darling, you have to understand this crowd. They thrive on drama. She's today's gossip. Tomorrow she'll be forgotten again. We are the future. She is the past. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, but the words felt hollow even to him. He knew he needed to reclaim the narrative, and fast. The evening was slipping through his fingers. There was one guaranteed way to re-establish his dominance, a public display of his power and philanthropic might. Come, he said, straightening his bow tie and plastering a confident smile on his face. There's someone I want you to meet properly, Richard Davies, the museum's director. We have some important business to discuss. He steered Chloe through the throng, his eyes fixed on the small dais where the orchestra was taking a break. Davies stood there, chatting with a board member. This was it. This would be the moment that reset the night. The Stanton and Finch proposal for the new International Art Exchange was a masterpiece of corporate synergy and cultural largesse. It was a multi-million-dollar commitment that would cement his firm's legacy and, by extension, his own. It was a done deal. The board loved him. The announcement was a mere formality. Richard, wonderful evening. Alex boomed, clapping the director on the shoulder with a practiced, easy bonhomie. A spectacular event, as always. Alex, Mr. Davies, replied, his smile polite but noticeably strained. His eyes flickered past Alex for a split second, a micro-expression that Alex registered but couldn't immediately place. Good to see you, and this must be Miss Summers. A pleasure. Chloe offered a practiced, pretty smile. I just wanted a quick word about the exchange partnership, Alex pressed, on lowering his voice to a conspiratorial tone. My team is ready to hit the ground running as soon as the announcement is made. Ah, yes, the exchange, Mr. Davies said, clearing his throat and avoiding Alex's gaze. He gestured towards the lectern on the dais. If you'll excuse me. Alex, you're just in time. I was about to make a few remarks. You'll want to hear this. A confident, predatory smile spread across Alex's face. He turned to Chloe, placing a hand on the small of her back. Watch this, my love, he whispered. This is how it's done. A hush fell over the great hall as Mr. Davies tapped the microphone. The ambient light seemed to dim, focusing all attention on the dais. Alex stood at the foot of the stage, a picture of smug anticipation. This was his moment of vindication. Good evening, everyone. Mr. Davies began, his voice resonating through the hall. On behalf of the Atherton board, I want to thank you all for your incredible generosity tonight. It is this support that allows the museum to dream bigger, to push boundaries, and to embark on ambitious new projects. None more so than our new International Art Exchange. Alex felt a surge of pride. He could feel Chloe looking up at him, her faith being restored. This program, Davies continued, is designed to be a bridge between worlds, a platform for visionary artists who might otherwise go unheard. To lead such a project, we knew we couldn't just partner with a benefactor. We needed a partner with a soul. We needed a curator with a proven preternatural eye for groundbreaking talent, an innovator with their finger on the pulse of the contemporary art world. Every word of praise inflated Alex's ego. Visionary, innovator. He had personally overseen the proposal's language. Davies was practically reading from his script. After a long and rigorous selection process, reviewing proposals from some of the most respected institutions and firms in the city, the board has made a unanimous decision. We are absolutely thrilled to announce that the lead curatorial partner for the Atherton International Art Exchange will be a gallery that in just 1 year has redefined our city's landscape for emerging art. Alex's smile was locked in place, ready to accept the applause. Galleria Russo. The name struck the air with the force of a physical impact. For a single horrifying second, There was dead silence as 200 of New York's most powerful people processed the information. Then the silence was shattered by a wave of applause, louder, more enthusiastic, and more sustained than for any other announcement of the night. The blood drained from Alexander Stanton's face. He felt a cold, prickling sensation sweep over his entire body, as if he'd been plunged into ice water. He stood frozen, the meaningless smile still plastered on his face, like a grotesque mask. He could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes turning their gazes, flicking from the stage to Irene, who was accepting the accolades with a nod of quiet regal grace, and then, inevitably, to him. They were looking at him with pity, with shock, with a delicious, schadenfreude-laced curiosity. Chloe stared at him, her own face pale with confusion. Did he just say her gallery? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the clapping. I thought she just sold paintings in a little shop. It's not a shop, Alex hissed, the words escaping through gritted teeth. The public humiliation was absolute. It was a professional evisceration. He hadn't just lost the contract. He had lost it to her in front of everyone who mattered. She hadn't just re-entered his world. She had conquered a piece of it he thought he owned. He looked across the room, and his eyes met Irene's. There was no gloating in her expression, no hint of smug revenge. There was only a calm, unshakable confidence. And that was the cruelest cut of all. This victory wasn't about him. He was merely an obstacle she had gracefully and ruthlessly stepped over. The applause finally subsided, but the air remained thick with the scandal. The narrative of the evening had been irrevocably rewritten. Alexander Stanton, the Titan, the power player, had been publicly outmaneuvered by the ex-wife he had cast aside as an irrelevant failure. He felt a tug on his sleeve and looked down at Chloe. The blind adoration in her eyes was gone, replaced by the first flicker of a new critical awareness. She was looking at him, really looking at him for the first time, and seeing not the invincible god she'd imagined, but a defeated man. A volcanic rage began to build in his chest, burning away the shock and humiliation. This was not a business decision. This was personal. This was a declaration of war. He grabbed Chloe's arm, his grip far tighter than he intended. "We're going," he snarled. "Where?" she asked, wincing at his grip. His eyes scanned the room, locking onto Irene's form as she accepted congratulations from the mayor. The polite Cold War was over. The pretense was finished. To find her, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "This ends now." Alex found her on the rooftop terrace, a space designed for quiet contemplation, with landscaped gardens framing a breathtaking panorama of Central Park. The distant muted strains of the orchestra below only served to amplify the sense of serene isolation. Irene was standing by the stone balustrade, looking out at the city's endless constellation of lights. She wasn't celebrating with bravado. She was absorbing the moment, a quiet hum of victory vibrating within her. The Atherton partnership was real. Her gallery, her creation, had been recognized on the grandest stage. For the first time in years, the future felt like a landscape of her own design. The sharp, furious clap of leather shoes on stone shattered the peace. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. The air itself seemed to curdle with his anger. He stalked toward her, stopping a foot away, his presence a suffocating wave of heat and rage. He was radiating a fury so potent it was almost visible, his tailored tuxedo seeming to shrink around his tense frame. "That was quite a performance," he spat. The words were low venomous, slicing through the elegant quiet. Irene turned slowly, her expression a carefully constructed mask of neutral calm. She refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. "I'm not performing, Alexander. You of all people should know the difference between a performance and a profession. Don't you dare play coy with me," he snarled, taking another step, invading her space. This entire evening was a calculated, strategic attack. The dress, the grand entrance cozying up to Eleanor Vance. And then, the grand finale, the Atherton announcement. You orchestrated every second of this, all of it designed for one purpose, to humiliate me. His narcissism was so profound, it was almost impressive. He genuinely couldn't conceive of a world where her actions weren't centered on him. Irene allowed a small, cool smile to touch her lips. Humiliate you, Alexander? That would require me to spare you a thought, and I'm afraid my thoughts have been occupied with far more important things, like building a business. The business, I might add, that just won the partnership your own firm was so desperate to acquire. She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Perhaps if Stanton and Finch spent more time cultivating a genuine connection to the art world instead of just trying to write a check, your proposal might not have been deemed so mediocre. The word hit him like a physical blow. Mediocre. It was the ultimate insult for a man obsessed with his own supposed greatness. A vein throbbed in his temple. Mediocrity. He let out a short, ugly bark of a laugh. I built an empire from what my father left me. I am respected. I am a success. And what have you done? What have you ever truly created? He took another step, his voice dropping to a familiar, cruel whisper, the one he had perfected in the final, agonizing months of their marriage. You failed, Irene. You failed at the most fundamental thing. You couldn't give me a son. You couldn't secure the Stanton legacy. He leaned in closer, his eyes burning with a vicious fire. So you can wrap yourself in these power suits and business deals all you want. You can collect your paintings and your accolades, but you are still the same cold, barren woman I left. You are empty, Irene, and you will always, always be empty. He had deployed his nuclear option, the words that had once shattered her into a million pieces. He stood back, a flicker of cruel satisfaction in his eyes, waiting for her to crumble. And in that moment, something inside Irene shifted. The memory of the sterile clinic of his cold pronouncement of her own weeping form flashed through her mind. The phantom pain was there, a familiar ache in her soul. But this time it was different. The pain was not a weakness. It was a whetstone. It had been sharpening her anger, her resolve, for over a year. And tonight, it had just honed it to a lethal edge. The mask of calm fell away, replaced by an expression of such cold, diamond-hard fury that he unconsciously took a step back. You're right about one thing, Alex, she said, her voice dangerously soft. Our life together was empty. The future we planned was empty. But you are tragically mistaken about the source of that emptiness. Just over his shoulder, she saw movement at the terrace doors. It was Chloe, her face etched with worry, likely drawn by the sight of Alex storming after his ex-wife. She hovered in the shadows, a silent, anxious spectator, unseen by Alex, who was now mesmerized by the sudden, terrifying change in Irene's demeanor. Irene held his gaze, knowing she now had a second audience member for the final act of his tragedy. I had a fascinating conversation earlier this evening, she continued, her voice like silk being drawn over a blade, with Dr. Marcus Thorne, such a kind man, terribly burdened by his conscience. He remembered everything so clearly. He remembered how you managed it all, Alex, how you insisted on certain specialists, the ones known for their utmost discretion, how you were always the first to receive the reports, which you would then summarize for me. Alex's face had gone pale under the moonlight. He's a senile old fool. He's rambling. Is he? Irene took a deliberate step toward him, forcing him back another. He also reminded me of your father, of your paralyzing fear of failing to meet his expectations. A man who, as the family whispers go, had his own legacy, threatening difficulties. It must be terrifying to fear you've inherited your father's greatest shame. The blood drained completely from his face. He looked trapped, cornered. Our chat was so enlightening. I was inspired, she went on, pressing her advantage. I made a call to a dear friend on the board at Johns Hopkins. It's truly amazing what doors open for you when you become a significant philanthropic donor. I had them locate the original unredacted files from our consultations. Not your summaries, Alex. The source documents. the ones you prayed I would never see. He was speechless now, his mouth opening and closing silently, like a fish gasping for air. Irene leaned in, her voice dropping to a clear, clinical, and utterly devastating whisper. The problem was never my barren womb, was it, Alex? The problem was never me. She let the silence stretch, watching the comprehension and terror dawn in his eyes. The medical term is azoospermia. I'm sure you know it well. 0. Count. You are sterile, Alexander. As empty as a desert. You can't have children. You never could. The truth, stark and brutal, landed in the quiet of the rooftop terrace with the force of a physical explosion. In the shadows, a hand flew to Chloe's mouth, stifling a choked, horrified gasp. Alex stared at Irene, his entire world collapsing in on him. But she wasn't finished. The rage she had suppressed for so long was now a righteous, cleansing fire. You let me believe I was broken, she said, her voice rising, not with a scream, but with the power of absolute conviction. You subjected me to invasive procedures, to hormonal treatments that made me sick to month after month of crushing disappointment. You let me mourn a child that you knew could never exist. You watched me cry, and you said nothing. You didn't destroy our marriage because you wanted a family. You destroyed it to protect your fragile, pathetic ego. You couldn't stand the thought of being seen as flawed, as a failure, especially by me. So you made me the failure instead. You are not a victim, Alex. You are not a tragic hero. You are a coward, a pathetic coward who built his entire life on a lie, and you destroyed the best thing you ever had to protect it. Her final words hung in the air, echoing in the profound silence. She watched as Alex's gaze shifted from her face, darting over her shoulder. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he finally saw the figure in the doorway. He saw Chloe, her face a perfect white mask of shock and revulsion, the diamonds at her throat glittering like frozen tears. He saw in her eyes the complete and utter demolition of the fantasy he had so carefully sold her. The man she adored had just been revealed as a monster and a fraud, and Irene had made sure she had a front-row seat for the revelation. The silence that descended upon the rooftop terrace was a vacuum pulling all the warmth and sound from the night. For a moment, the three of them were a frozen tableau, the exposed liar, the shattered ingenue, and the silent victor. Alex, stripped of his bravado, looked utterly diminished. He was a king whose castle had just dissolved into sand, and he reached for the last person he thought he still controlled. Chloe, please, he began, his voice a pathetic rasp. Don't listen to her. She's twisting things. She's always been manipulative. Chloe flinched away from his outstretched hand, as if it were a serpent. Her tear-filled eyes, once pools of adoration, were now hard and sharp with betrayal. Manipulative, she echoed, a hysterical laugh catching in her throat. You stood by me for months, letting me plan a nursery in my head. You let me talk about names, about schools, about what our children would look like. And every single time you were lying. Her voice cracked on the final word, the full weight of his deception crashing down on her. Every single time. Was I just a prop, Alex? A pretty, fertile-looking prop to distract everyone from your pathetic secret? It wasn't like that, he stammered, but the words were hollow, weightless. There was no defense. She shook her head, a violent, definitive motion. A single, perfect tear traced a path through her makeup. I feel so stupid, she whispered. The words meant more for herself than for him. So unbelievably stupid. Without another glance, she turned and fled. Her sob was the only sound she made as she pushed through the heavy doors and vanished back into the glittering, oblivious party below, leaving the scent of her sweet, youthful perfume to mingle with the bitter odor of deceit. Alex was left alone in the wreckage. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He simply stared at the empty doorway, where his future had just disappeared. Finally, slowly, he turned his head and looked at Irene. His eyes, which had once held a mixture of condescending affection and later cold dismissal, were now filled with something raw and primal, a bottomless, defeated hatred. He had built his world on a single carefully guarded lie, and she had dismantled it with a single unassailable truth. There was nothing left to say. Irene met his gaze, holding it for a long moment. She felt no triumphant surge, no thrill of victory. Seeing him so completely broken didn't bring her joy. Instead, a profound, almost serene sense of finality washed over her. It was the feeling of closing a heavy book, its painful story finally read and understood. The debt had been paid. The scales were balanced. Without a word, she turned to the marble balustrade. She picked up the untouched flute of champagne she had been holding all this time, its bubbles now flat. She inverted the glass and poured the contents out into the cool night air, a silent offering to a past that no longer had any power over her. Then she walked away, her heels clicking with quiet purpose on the stone, leaving Alexander Stanton to the company of his own ruins. Her journey back through the Great Hall was a completely different experience from her arrival. The whispers that followed her now were not of shock, but of awe. She moved through a sea of parted guests, catching snippets of conversation, fragments of her own legend being born in real time. Saw Chloe run out in tears. Face was as white as a sheet. Never raised her voice. That's power. Took back everything he stole from her, and the Vance account besides. She didn't acknowledge any of it. Her focus was on the grand entrance, the gateway back to her real life. She nodded politely to Miss Davies, who gave her a look of immense, almost paternal respect. She bypassed Eleanor Vance, who simply inclined her head, a silent acknowledgement passing between them that spoke volumes. This was Irene's moment, and it required no commentary. Outside, the cool air felt like a benediction. Handing her ticket to the valet, she waited, standing apart from the departing crowds. When her car, a sleek black Audi, pulled up to the curb, she felt a wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her knees. This car would not be taking her back to a cold penthouse on Park Avenue, filled with unspoken resentments. It would be taking her home, to her loft, to her gallery, to her life. The drive through the sleeping city was quiet. As the familiar streets of Seoul unspooled before her, Irene finally allowed herself to lean her head back against the cool leather seat and exhale. It was a breath she felt she had been holding for over a year, a breath full of pain, grief, and suffocating silence. As it left her body, she felt lighter. The ghost of the woman she had been, the sad, broken wife, defined by her husband's rejection, had finally been laid to rest tonight. In its place stood Irene Rousseau, a woman defined by nothing but her own strength. The weeks that followed confirmed the seismic shift that had occurred at the gala. The story, in its various embellished forms, became the cautionary tale of the social season. Alexander Stanton, once a titan, became a recluse. Stanton and Finch reported a dismal quarter as whispers of an unstable leader spooked investors. He was a man haunted by his own echo. Irene conversely blossomed. Her work was her focus and her joy. The Atherton partnership was a roaring success, launching her into an international sphere. She spent her days in the gallery, the air thick with the smell of turpentine and fresh canvas, surrounded by the challenging, vibrant, beautiful art that was her life's passion. She was on a conference call with the director of the Louvre one afternoon when Maya placed a small, heavy package on her desk. It was wrapped in thick, expensive paper, bearing no return address. Curious, she unwrapped it. Inside a velvet-lined box lay a stunning antique compass, its casing crafted from polished silver and inlaid with shimmering mother-of-pearl. Tucked beneath it was a card, its stationery thick and embossed with a single regal V. The handwriting was sharp and elegant. The note was brief, So you always know your true north. Looking forward to our partnership. EV. Irene sank into her chair, the compass cool and solid in her hand. It was from Eleanor Vance. This wasn't just a gift. It was an anointment. It was a formal welcome into the city's true power structure, a circle built, not on gilded names or brittle egos, but on substance, respect, and mutual strength. Eleanor wasn't just offering a business alliance. She was acknowledging Irene as an equal, a fellow navigator in treacherous waters. She looked from the compass in her hand to the art that had adorned her gallery walls. Each piece was a testament to survival, to a story told to beauty forged in struggle. Alex had called her empty, a vessel incapable of creation. Yet here she was, surrounded by a world she had built from scratch, a world brimming with life, passion, and purpose. He had been wrong. She was the furthest thing from empty. She was a creator, a curator of resilience, her own, and that of the artists she championed. The compass needle quivered, then settled, pointing steadfastly north. Irene smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached her eyes. She had navigated her way out of the darkest wilderness, not by following a set path, but by charting her own. Her kingdom was secure, her heart was her own, and her reign was just beginning. And so Irene Rousseau proved that the greatest revenge isn't loud or destructive, but is in fact living a life so full and successful that your past becomes nothing more than a footnote. She didn't need to destroy Alex Stanton. His own lies did that for him. Her victory was in her resilience, in rebuilding her world, not from his ashes, but from her own fire. This story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never defined by who leaves us, but by what we build after they're gone. It's about turning your deepest wounds into your greatest strengths. What did you think of Irene's epic comeback? Could you feel the tension in that final confrontation? Let me know your favorite moment in the comments below.
What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone." He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently, securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City, as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself, already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them. Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. Where am I supposed to go, Julian? She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent. He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. I will. Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. You know, I almost feel sorry for you, he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you. He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned, in his voice a venomous whisper in her ear. Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone. He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. No one will ever want you. You will die alone. She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty, and in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. "No one will ever want you." It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. "This," Chloe said with a flourish, "is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there." Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. "Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron." "First," Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, "I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep." Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge. I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible. Too bad, Chloe countered. Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him. Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. You will die alone. Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. Okay, I'll go. Chloe's smile was triumphant. That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. Stop hiding behind the ficus, Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. You look like a goddess. Own it. They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. I need some air, she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas? The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. Yes, Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, it's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture. The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. Most people just see the ballerina, he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. You see the work. A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field. Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. Is she corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting. It is my field. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. Good. An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne. Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. You know him, he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I'm sorry, he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. It's fine. I should go back inside. Wait, he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. My name is Alistair. He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. Emma, she replied. Emma, he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work. He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina. Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive, as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list. Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. "Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now." With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story. The photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend, the handhold seen round the world? Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she, gold digger alert? Poor Julian. He's so classy. She's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster. Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. "Don't read that garbage," she ordered. "I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient, weaponized press release." Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. "Oh, honey." She enveloped Emma in a hug. "Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe," Emma croaked. "Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing." "Of course he did," Chloe said, her voice steely. "This is his playbook. Control the narrative, isolate the target, publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator." Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. "Don't answer it," she whispered. "It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support," Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. "Who is it?" A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. "It's Alistair Sterling." "For Emma Vance." Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. "Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn." "Let him in," Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. "For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in." In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. "Miss Vance." "Emma," he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. "I know this is an intrusion. May I come in?" She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. "I came to apologize," he said, turning back to her. "My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that." "It's not your fault," Emma said, finding her voice. "It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours." Alistair countered. "And I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here." He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. "This is for you." She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. "It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone," he explained. "Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe." Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. "I also saw his statement." Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen." Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. "Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming." Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. "You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms." He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. "He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence." A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. "He built his entire empire on my work." The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. "What do you mean, his book?" Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. "The architect of you. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide. Chloe looked horrified. Emma, you never told me it was that direct. I was ashamed, Emma admitted. And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project. Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. Do you have proof? He asked quietly. Drafts, notes, emails. Emma's heart leaped. Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything. Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. Then, we have a new plan, he said. We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about. He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it. The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the architect of you directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. He didn't just steal my words, she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity. Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. He won't get away with it, Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. Now, we need to choose our moment. The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. It's perfect, Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down, Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. I can't just walk in and accuse him. You won't have to, Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds. The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy. Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process. Julian preened. It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul. Interesting, Sarah said, looking down at her notes. Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, to be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality. A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, the Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality. A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on? The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name? Sarah countered, her voice sharp. Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. "I am not a victim or a gold digger," the statement read. "I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of the architect of you were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out." The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the architect of you was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. "Quiet." She whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. "The storm. I think it's finally over." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. "No," he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. "The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn." The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorne fraud, The Great Pretender, and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. "In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne." It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the color back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. "He thought it was an ending," she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. "But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work. Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise. And it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential. If this story of resilience, justice, and unexpected love moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next deep dive into the most incredible real-life dramas. What did you think of Julian's takedown? Let me know in the comments below.